Hello, sleepy heads. Tonight we drift not by firelight, but by wake and tide, between a river that fed kingdoms and a city that fed on the world. The Nile rises with a patience older than pyramids. The Tiber answers with docks, ledgers, and hunger that learned to count. Somewhere between silt and marble, two households share a table, and the menu is policy. Before settling beneath linen and wool, a small ritual. Tap like and subscribe if quiet histories keep the dark at the door, and whisper where the night finds this voice. Now, dim the lamps like temple lights at dusk. In Egypt, listen, floodwater murmurs against levees, granaries exhale warm grain dust, and a clay lamp paints a gold oval on reed mats. In Rome, the hypercaust purrs under mosaic floors, a brazier ticks as metal cools, and the harbor breath carries salt and garum to the insular stairs. We'll walk both shores, the Nile's black earth and the Tiber's stone quays, feeling how bread becomes treaty, how wind becomes schedule, how a queen's whisper can tilt a convoy's course. Good news, the ships are coming. Bad news, the weather votes. So ease back, let the fan hum like oars in steady cadence, and follow the line of grain from river mouth to city belly, until the map itself grows drowsy and the ancient world drifts into one long, breathing coast. You wake before the sun does, a pale wash of light thinking about the horizon while the Nile breathes beside you like a slow giant turning in sleep. The mud underfoot is the dark kind that keeps secrets, cool, fine, and rich with last season's memory ground to silk by water and time. Reed stems whisper to each other in a warm crossbreeze, and somewhere beyond the date palms a boat knocks softly against a wooden mooring, water slapping plank, plank answering back. You smell fish scales drying on twine, crushed onion skins under heel, a thread of brine from the market where the day will open its mouth and start bargaining for real. This place runs on rhythm, not the clatter of coins, not the shout of soldiers, but the pulse of water that keeps its own calendar and expects the valley to respect it. Akut brings the flood, fields surrender to brown glass, the river climbs its banks and sets a table for everyone whether they remembered to ask or not. When it retreats, Perret rises with green blades where there was only shine a week before, grain sown into wet memory, barley riding the silt like a promise that learned to sprout. Then Shimu, sickles flash, chaff lifts, and the air tastes like straw and sweat and something close to victory poured into baskets that breathe dust when the sun looks at them just right. You are small in this, smaller than the long cloud dragging a shadow over the floodplain, smaller than the storied stones upriver, smaller than a ledger scratched on clay that says how much will go where when boats push off for the sea. But the river makes room for you anyway. It slides past with unwavering patience, pretending not to notice your footprints on its edge as you scoop its skin with a gourd and tip it into basins walled with honest mud. Basin irrigation is an old trick with young hands every year, earthen dikes catching water, holding it the way cupped palms hold a drink against a hot day, letting it sink slow until the soil hums with enough to carry wheat, emmer, flax, and the vegetables that keep the bowl from being only brown and bland. A shaduf creaks like a patient door, counterweight rising, bucket dipping, a slick sound as it cuts the surface, a little river flying briefly through air before it lands where the roots are waiting. You taste the morning on your tongue, date wine sweetness left on a cup from last night, the rough comfort of coarse bread that pretends not to be a luxury when the harvest smiles, the salt from fish smoke that never really leaves the market's rafters. You cough once as granary dust lifts under a shaft of light and turns the air into a slow glitter that your eyes insist on following until the breeze reminds them to blink. Somewhere a cow snorts and leans into a wooden yoke that knows the shape of its shoulders better than most people know the shape of their own names. A child trails a stick along a dike wall. The earth answers with a low crumble and a sigh that warns the overseer to pat and mend before the water thinks about escaping. This is wealth measured in moisture and timing, not just how much, but when, and whether the river will keep its appointment with the valley the way it has since memory decided to sit down and stay. The predictability is a comfort that knows its own sharp edge, too high and boats drift through orchards where bees were working yesterday. too low and seeds sleep in dust while priests watch the sky and practice calm faces. You have learned to count with your feet, how the mud tugs at your sandals tells you whether the flood has more to say or is already done speaking for the year. You do not own the water, you negotiate with it, you flatter it with channels, you persuade it with walls, you court it with offerings that are really just a way to say please keep doing what you have always done. And yet, you hear, even this far from the harbor, the rumor that rides in with sailors who smell like tar and foreign oil. West of here the sea drinks more grain than it ever admits, and on that far shore a city stacks mouths into hills and calls it glory while its stomach writes the policy. Rome, someone says with a shrug that tries to be casual and fails, a name that tastes like iron and olive pits and the wet chill of a river that does not know how to be kind in winter. They say the crowds there are as real as weather, one missed convoy and the forum remembers how to be a storm. You run your hand along the lip of a storage jar. The clay is cool and slightly grainy. It leaves a whisper of red on your fingertips like the day marking you for later when you count and tie and seal. You listen to the granary breathe, a quiet settling that is also a chorus of tiny, almost inaudible sounds that tell you the harvest is alive in there, ready to be lifted one basket at a time to the quay when the river is fat enough to carry and forgiving enough not to tip. You imagine the line of hulls at Alexandria, painted eyes open on their prows, looking at the swell as if the sea were a stubborn animal that might be charmed into good behavior if someone would just meet its gaze and refuse to blink first. The briny scent of that harbor is already here in your mind, a reminder that this valley does not end at the horizon, that mud and silt can decide the temper of a city you may never see. Abundance is a song with a warning in the chorus: sing too loud and hungry neighbors learn the tune. The Nile gives with both hands, but generosity draws maps and armies as surely as it fills jars. In good years the storerooms swell and laughter spills. In lean years the same rooms echo while eyes turn to the east wind and ask old questions with new urgency. You have watched men measure the river's rise against stone marks etched by grandfathers who were careful and stubborn. Low notches from bad years are rubbed smooth by anxious fingers. High lines from dangerous years are patted like sleeping dogs that you hope will not wake soon. You pick up a handful of silt and press it. It sticks to itself with quiet confidence and stains your palm black-brown like a promise written without ink. This is the engine that hums beneath the politics and the poetry, the dependable miracle that turns sun and flood into bread that can be counted, taxed, shipped, and turned into favors that change the direction of ships already at sea. You do not need to see a senate to understand a vote when you hold it like this. The weight is real and damp and smells faintly of last year's reeds. Somewhere, far from your field, someone will call this leverage. Here, it is just the necessary magic that sits in your hands and dries into something that will crack unless it is used soon. Before the day fully stands up, you walk the bank and count the shallow breaths of the river where it widens. Slow, regular, no panic hiding in the ripples. A heron lifts and redraws the line between water and sky with its wings, and for a moment the world is nothing but soft gray and the suggestion of green waiting under it. You pull your cloak tight even though the air is already warm to someone who does not know this country. Your skin knows the night still clings in the shade and the damp can find bones you thought were newer than they are. A vendor opens his stall with a push that sounds like a question, and the first shoppers begin the small talk that oils a market better than any imported amphora ever could. By noon there will be arguments about price and gossip about governors and a sailor's story that grows another sail every time it is told. By evening there will be smoke that tastes like celebration even when it is only dinner, and children who fall asleep before they mean to with flour on their cheeks and reeds in their hair. The river will keep its counsel, dark again, wide again, secretly counting toward the next promise it will make with a silence that is not empty but full of patient arithmetic. You will sleep with silt under your nails and a map in your head that starts at your threshold and ends at a city of stone where hunger is a law and bread is the only argument that never needs translation. You are a person in a field at the edge of a great machine that pretends to be only water and sunlight and labor, but it is also ships and ledgers and treaties that use the word friendship when they mean schedule and obligation when they mean power. You are, without trying, part of a sentence that begins in mud and ends in marble, and the verb is always the same: feed. The breeze turns the reeds into 1,000 small voices, and for a heartbeat you think they say your name, but they are only practicing the word grain in a language older than stone. When a river feeds an empire, the empire eventually wants the river. The reeds are still whispering in your ears when the sound changes. Oars trade places with keels, silted banks become stone quays, and the river that fed the valley becomes a ledger that feeds a city that never stops asking. You carry the memory of black earth into a harbor that smells like metal, fish, and promises kept on paper. The first thing you hear is not a gull. It is the scrape of a stylus across wax, long, sure strokes that turn sacks into numbers and numbers into temper. Someone clears a throat. Someone else tilts an oil lamp and coaxes a thicker flame. The lamp gutters and throws a trembling halo over columns of tallies: ship name, tonnage, delay, excuse. Rome digests by lamplight, and the sound is paperwork. You walk the aisles of a storehouse that feels like a sleeping amphitheater. The floor is dusted with flour so fine it squeaks under sandals. The air tastes like grain and old wood, with a sour tang of garum that rode the sea in jostling amphory and refuses to leave even after the stoppers have been pulled. You pass a table where a clerk drags the stylus again and again across the same line, not out of doubt, but because repetition is the only ward he has against winter. Outside, anchors rise in a metallic chorus from harbor mouths farther south. Their chain links complain like old men and then square their shoulders as if iron could decide to be brave. From Ostia, the sound travels up the Tiber like a rumor that puts its hand on the Senate's shoulder and squeezes just a little too hard. You do not eat yet. Rome eats first. Soldiers crack coarse bread between knuckles whitened by drill and cold, steam rising in thin ghosts, oil pooling in the torn pockets like sunlight caught in stone. A centurion tears, chews, swallows, nods to no one, and watches the sky. He knows that bread is policy. He knows that a missing convoy is not a maritime accident. It is a speech that begins in the stomach and ends at a rostrum with sentences that cannot be interrupted by eloquence. You watch him dip a piece in brine and think of the valley you left at dawn. There the flood is a covenant. Here the loaf is a vote. Conquest sounds loud when it is happening. Hooves, trumpets, shutters slamming as doors close 2 streets ahead of the marching line. But conquest goes quiet afterward, and the quiet is logistics. Corridors of sacks. Locks and seals. Men with neat hair who count more carefully than priests and feel holier doing it. You move with them under arches that catch the last light of a short day. Every threshold is an abacus, heads in, heads out, mouths added by victory like stones poured into a jar already full. You lift a sack with 2 others and feel how heavy policy is when it has not been baked yet. It rides in the lower back with a seriousness that tells you who actually runs a city this size. Not marble, not bronze, not the men whose names are carved in either. Rope, wood, sail, muscle, nerve. A bell rings. Not a temple. A signal on the water, a boat nosing the current with a captain who stares up into the teeth of an early squall and keeps coming anyway. Winter seas do not care for your calendars. They respect schedules the way wolves respect fences, briefly and out of curiosity. On the quay, a supervisor runs 2 fingers along the edge of a tablet where the wax has cooled with a bubble in it. He will not smooth it. The floor is the truth. Everything planned against the weather is a gamble with good manners. The lamps gutter again in a gust. Someone cups the flame. Someone curses the wind like a disobedient junior. You climb to a balcony that smells like rope and look down at Rome's appetite arranged in rows. Granaries breathe the same patient way the Nile did at daybreak, but there is a difference you feel in your ribs. The valley's breath was circular: flood, sow, reap, sleep. The city's breath is linear: arrive, unload, tally, issue. There is no room for a late inhale. If a convoy limps in short by even a few hundred modi, the shortage moves through the streets faster than feet can carry it. You can hear it now even before it starts, the scuff of sandals turning into a shuffle, turning into a push that becomes a press. Voices climb out of conversation into complaint and then stand on tiptoe looking for a target. A baker lifts a peel and slides loaves into a mouth of stone. He glances at the queue outside with the skill of a man who has learned to read crowds the way sailors read clouds. He sees the boy already measuring how far he can shove before a hand finds his ear. He sees the woman who will not be moved because she is the kind of anchor crowds form around without knowing it. He sees the old man whose face says he has survived worse and whose hands say he has not eaten since yesterday. He adds a heartbeat to his count before turning the peel. Little delays accumulate into a tremor you can taste. The sourness of garum in the air sharpens like a knife stoned too fine. You step back into the storehouse and find the clerk again. The stylus whispers and scratches. Tally, tally, tally. A grain law is not a speech carved into stone. It is a column of numbers that must add up so the street does not subtract the day from order. You watch a token change hands, a small rectangle that might as well be a blessing. It is exchanged with a nod that says, "We both know this is civilization, not statues. This." The ritual is as old as fear, and it works until it does not. When it fails like a shelf does, all at once and loudly, jars exploding into shards and syrup, people slipping and falling into each other in a mess that smells like sweetness and waste. A runner comes in with river on his cloak. His words are simple and set down like stones. The second ship is late. He says it twice. Late. The clerk does not look up. He writes a word you cannot see and then draws his breath in through his nose as if to store it for later. The runner's boots leave small melted ovals where ice remembered the floor. Winter sneaks into Rome sideways, through gaps under doors, through damp that refuses to evaporate, through rumor that chills faster than wind. You go to the doorway and look out. The sky over the river is the color of lead hammered thin. A hawk hangs on nothing. The city inhales and waits to see whether it will be allowed to exhale. On the quay, anchors rise again with less music. The chains are stiff now and sound tired of pretending to be brave. Sailors on the next hull over pull a stopper and test a jar of oil against the light. Its gloss is the only sunshine in reach. They laugh too loudly at something that was not funny and then go quiet as if they remembered they were being useful to a million strangers. A cartwheel hits a rut and swears in wood. The team leans and the driver speaks to them like they are already on the same side of a problem they have not met yet. He promises them things that are not his to give: dry roads, easy hills, applause. You pass a cohort forming up to march back to barracks. The bread they cracked earlier sits now like ballast in bellies instead of holes. Their faces are calmer than they were at the last shortage when a rumor sprinted ahead of the facts and the city discovered how much fury it could carry with very little food. They remember the taste of that day. They remember that shields work on grain lines and forums as well as they do on fields. They remember that a loaf can be a weapon even when it is being eaten. One man catches your eye by accident and looks away quickly. He knows as well as you do that order wears a uniform but depends on deliveries. At the water's edge a boy is teaching a smaller boy how to listen for anchors without looking. He closes his eyes and names the ships by the scold in the links and the weight in the splash. He is not always right, but he is never bored. When he opens his eyes, a woman puts a hand on his head and turns him toward home where dinner is an arithmetic problem she is practiced at solving. She has tokens. She has a friend at a side door. She has a voice that can move 3 places forward and only make 1 enemy. She has a memory like a ledger and can tell you which winter tasted of turnip and which tasted of vinegar. Back in the office, the lamp gutters again. The clerk feeds it a breath and a curl of wick. The flame steadies with a tiny roar that says, "Do not mistake small for weak." He draws a line under total and presses a seal that leaves a ring you could find by touch in the dark. You think of the Nile and how it taught you patience because there was nothing else to learn first. Rome teaches you something different, urgency with manners. You are expected to be calm while the city worries for you. You are expected to be efficient while the sea decides whether it respects your plans today. The wind noses the door open and brings in a smell from the docks, fish, tar, and the sharp, fermented insistence of garum that convinces even bread to taste like the sea. You close your eyes and the storehouse floor becomes a shoreline. Behind your eyelids anchors are still rising and styluses are still scratching and the city is still feeding itself through the narrowest of throats. You feel the pressure of every mouth lined up behind yours and do not mind that you cannot see them. You trust the math because there is no other faith available to a city this size. Night will come, and with it the kind of cold that makes marble ache. Lamps will multiply in windows like deliberate stars. Somewhere a senator will rehearse a sentence about stability and public virtue. Somewhere else a baker will decide to stay open 1 hour longer and save more lives than the speech. A ship will nose the river at last with frost on its ropes and a prayer in its hull. Another will not. The balance will hold because enough men and women insisted that it must in the small ways no statue will ever show. And if it does not hold, the sound will be unmistakable, sandals accelerating on stone, voices climbing over each other, fists finding wood. The line between policy and panic is as thin as a crust. You stand in the doorway and watch the last light fall into the river like coin. The city counts again. It always will. Conquest created the mouths that ask. Supply lines create the rulers who answer. The stylus scrapes, the lamp gutters, the anchors sing, the air tastes like brine and promises. In Rome, an empty belly can unseat a full senate. The city's appetite is still in your ears when the horizon shifts from Rome's damp stone to a coast drawn in bright syllables. Alexandria, where painted hulls lean into the quay like gossiping guests who arrived early on purpose. The harbor smells busy, brine and pitch, citrus crushed under sandals, a thin ribbon of incense that wandered out of a shrine and refused to go home. You feel the planks answer the sea with a hollow thud as anchors bite and ropes sing through calloused hands. Color travels first, cobalt eyes painted on prows, vermilion trim, a green that belongs to distant hills no one here has seen. Goods come next, amphorae lined like disciplined soldiers, bales stitched tight, a soft clink of glass that remembers furnaces far inland. The quay is a tongue and the city is ready to taste. You step into shade that smells like cool stone and pepper, and a scribe lifts a rolled sheet that crackles like leaves at the end of summer. Papyrus speaks when it is unwrapped, a dry music, small but confident. The treaty inside is formal even when the day is not. It lists weights, harbor fees, the order in which favors will pretend to be friendship. A translator stands near and rolls Greek into Latin and back again, vowels polished like river pebbles pass palm to palm until they shine with agreement. He does not hurry. Each word is placed where it cannot slip. Behind him, a bowl of pomegranates glows like cut rubies under a thread of sun. Hands hover. Seeds stain fingertips with a kind of temporary wealth. You are shown a ring first, not a room. Gold is an argument that needs no verbs. It glints as one official turns it, smiles almost, and sets it beside the treaty as if to pin the page to the table without touching it. The air is respectful. The air is calculating. Someone breathes in as if to speak and does not. Outside, the harbor coughs a rope and clears its throat. Inside, a title is tested on a tongue and fit like a new shoe: envoy, friend, merchant, guest. The options are many. The choices are few. Goods move first because they are the easiest to agree upon. Cinnamon does not argue. Linen does not correct pronunciation. Grain does not care what you call it as long as the scales behave. The dockhands prove this. Their world is lift, carry, stack, and the satisfaction of a line that holds. But ideas have a way of stepping off the gangplank 2 steps behind the cargo. You hear them as the day warms, tax rates nested inside metaphors, cult titles explained through a smile that asks whether the god is a local or a traveler, legal customs folded like cloth so they can be packed without wrinkling. A Roman officer listens to an Egyptian priest describe a ritual in a tone that makes it sound like a shipping schedule. A librarian mentions a copyist who can find a passage in a scroll the way a pilot finds the channel at night. Obligations are the last to arrive and the first to unpack themselves. The treaty is clear in a way that leaves room for need. Shipments will be timely. Escorts will be provided on seas that do not respect ink. Prices will not wobble when storms do. In return, docks will be available, repairs swift, disputes handled indoors with wine rather than outdoors with noise. The words are sharp where they must be, if, unless, notwithstanding. The papyrus crackles again as it is re-rolled, the sound like a door shutting softly. Everyone hears it. Everyone pretends it is only paper. You walk back into the light and the harbor lifts its voice. Painted hulls touch stone. Men with ropes sing 3-syllable commands that could be names or just the way this job refuses to be silent. You catch the sour thread of garum from a storage shed where amphorae lean like conspirators. You watch a money changer test a coin by biting it lightly, his face unreadable except for the moment his eyes soften, real. A boy tips a jug to rinse dust from figs, the spill making a dark map on the stone that points nowhere and everywhere at once. A woman brushes pomegranate seeds from her palm and leaves a comet of red on her sleeve that she will not see until night. Curiosity wears official clothing here. An envoy asks after the temples with a smile that implies devotion and a mind that counts steps and pillars. A harbor master asks how the Tiber smells in winter and listens carefully to the answer for anything that could become policy. A sailor asks how long it takes to copy a book and whether the script changes the meaning. A translator asks nothing and notes everything, vowels rolling smooth as river stones as he ferries courtesy back and forth. The words are polite. The silences are honest. Both are necessary. Caution is not a secret. It is a public courtesy. Friendship is priced in grain today and in escort ships tomorrow. You see it in the way rings flash and then vanish back under sleeves. You see it in a small pause before a promise, filled quickly with laughter. An Alexandrian merchant agrees to a delivery schedule that will require wind to behave and murmurs a prayer so softly it could be a cough. A Roman quartermaster nods in a rhythm that counts backward from the last riot. An officer marks a margin note that is not a warning and not a joke. Everyone is thinking of storms. No one mentions them. By afternoon, the harbor is a book being read aloud in many voices. Names of ships rise above the clatter, repeated until they turn into omens. The painted eyes on the prows look pleased with themselves. Anchors shrug up from water with the effort of men who stopped complaining an hour ago and found the work easier. On a balcony, a figure in white watches and does not wave. From this height, the hulls look like punctuation, commas arriving to keep the long sentence of empire from running out of breath. You blink and the sun moves, setting gold along the edge of a tablet on a table indoors where the treaty has been put to bed. Dusk pulls mint from the air and mixes it with smoke. Lanterns float into view one by one like answers that took their time. A last boat noses in, late enough to learn humility, early enough to be forgiven. Its captain kisses the key like an old friend and pretends not to. Men laugh a little too loudly at nothing in particular. Someone opens a jar that smells like cardamom and honey and a road that does not cross water. The bowl of pomegranates is a handful lighter. Rings are quiet now, hidden against skin that remembers the cool of metal even when the mind is elsewhere. You stand with a view of the water and think of a city upriver that counts mouths instead of stars. You think of a valley that counts floods and finds courage when the numbers do not behave. Between them, this harbor holds out its hands and weighs both futures without blinking. The first handshake was a rope thrown from deck to shore. The second was a ring set beside a scroll. The third is invisible and already binding, a schedule that will decide tempers by morning. Every treaty is a tab that someone plans to collect. The harbor lights fade behind your eyes, but the sea does not. It follows you inland as rumor and arithmetic, until the palace air is warm with incense and calculation. You pass beneath painted ceilings that pretend to be sky, and your sandals whisper over smooth stone where power has learned to walk softly. At the end of the hall a curtain breathes. It smells of lotus and lamp oil, and when it moves you can almost hear a map unfolding. She is already counting before you speak. Not coin, not soldiers, but outcomes. The linen at her wrist makes a quiet sound, the light kisses gold on a bracelet that remembers older thrones, and her voice arrives with the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed every answer and 3 of the questions. Cleopatra has learned the math of survival the way others learn prayer. By repetition, by need, by the understanding that a wrong syllable can end a family. When she lifts her hand, a scribe stops midline as if punctuation could stand at attention. You have come through rooms where the Nile is present even in absence. Barges veined with gold drift in painted panels, fish scales glint on inlays, blue that once belonged to sky now lives in pigment. Outside, real water carries the city's pulse, but here the current is conversation. She asks about Rome's weather as if inquiring after a fever. You answer with the truth that a city so large has many temperatures at once. Her smile is a small coin. It pays for entry into the next sentence. A tray appears with pomegranates broken into stars. Rings brush seeds, and fingers stain red that will not wash until morning. Incense thickens at the edges of breath. The hall tastes like sweetness braided with smoke, and you realize the room is set to be remembered. Taste ties memory tighter than ink. Cleopatra leans not forward but inward, the way a chess player leans toward a board inside her own skull. Grain is a word you do not have to introduce. It is already seated, invited, promised a good view. You tell her what you told the harbor stones: Rome is hungry and winter is impolite. She does not laugh, but a line near her mouth concedes the joke could exist. She taps the air once, twice. The gesture summons not servants but possibilities. An alliance is not a gift. It is a lever. She has weighed the Roman civil wars and found them useful only if they are brief and biased in her favor. Support the wrong Roman and you lose your crown. Support none and you lose your country. The problem is not new. The stakes are. When Caesar's name arrives, it does not arrive alone. It brings the smell of rain on marble, the grit of roads that know how to swallow armies, and the noise of a city that negotiates with itself in public daily. Cleopatra lets the name sit. Language is one of her instruments, and she tunes it now, Greek to Latin to Egyptian and back, vowels polished to a shine by translators who know that a single consonant can turn help into tribute. She does not waste the room's attention. She uses it the way an oarsman uses current, to move farther with less noise. At her nod, a map is rolled open. Papyrus crackles like dry leaves. The Nile unfolds as if it were a sentence written by a patient god. Dots mark granaries. Lines mark roads and channels. Small boat glyphs gather like punctuation where the river fattens for export. She touches Alexandria with a ring that blinks briefly at the light. Here the ships will kiss the sea. She touches her own throat as if to feel the pulse there. Here Rome will feel the beat if it places fingers on the right vein. Outside, night crowds the palace walls with heat that refuses to leave even when the stars insist on cool. Inside, The air is measured. Perfume sits in the rafters and drops only when invited. You think of barges veined with gold, not because luxury matters to hunger, but because spectacle arranges attention. Cleopatra understands that grain feeds bellies and theater feeds decisions. You watch her place both on the same scale. The beam steadies. She smiles, and the room pretends it was planning to exhale anyway. She asks for the timetable again, not because she doubts the numbers but because she enjoys watching them obey. You talk in weeks and sails, in convoys and escorts, in men whose job is to make weather behave by staring at it until it feels embarrassed. She listens for the wobble in your voice and hears none. Then she provides one of her own, on purpose. A hesitation that says, I could do this without you, but I will do it with you if it costs you more. A bargain is a theater with 2 actors and 1 audience, the future. A door opens just wide enough to admit a rumor. It slips in like a well-trained cat, not seen, certainly felt. Someone in Rome has sworn to end someone else. Someone has rewritten an oath to fit a different mouth. The city by the Tiber is boiling. Cleopatra does not look at the door. She lets the rumor lick at her ankles and then uses it to warm the conversation. Stability is a word that tastes better when the room is already steady. She offers it in measured portions, winter convoys nailed to dates, escorts named and paid, prices locked with seals that no one dares copy. Then she asks for what she came to take, recognition that is also protection, protection that is also time. She does not say soldiers. She says peace that travels armed. She does not say dependency. She says mutual advantage and lets the syllables strike the pillar and come back sounding sensible. A scribe's reed scratches. The sound is a small river cutting its bed. You realize the treaty is already a fact that language will eventually catch up to. When Caesar finally stands in her presence, Rome arrives at human scale. He smells faintly of travel and strategy. Dust has learned to love his cloak and refuses to leave it. He is older than the room expected and more awake than the rumor suggested. Cleopatra moves the air no more than a hand's width. That is enough. Her charisma is not a flare. It is a tide. It lifts everything without calling attention to the lifting. She speaks first in Greek, then folds a sentence in Latin that lands exactly where it needed to. Language is her weapon that does not look like one. Leverage is her shield disguised as welcome. They do not speak of grain as if it were a matter for clerks. They speak of it the way generals speak of terrain and poets of weather. Bread is a way to hold a city together in the rain. Bread is a way to teach loyalty to a crowd that prefers excitement. Bread is a reason wars do not start this week. Cleopatra offers schedules as if they were jewels and fleets as if they were compliments. Caesar offers recognition as if it were a coin and soldiers as if they were metaphors. Each pretends the other is not calculating. Both are counting by touch inside their sleeves. Night deepens and turns the palace windows into black mirrors. Outside, the Nile slides by with the patience of empire and the memory of mud. Inside, a jug clinks softly when it is set down, and the sound feels like a decision placed on a table. Cleopatra moves through the room the way a prow cuts water, cleanly, without apology, asking the river to agree with her simply because she has already started moving. Her court robes whisper at her ankles like a secret that is proud of itself. Light catches on the edge of a headdress and throws a thin coin of sun across Caesar's cheek. He does not blink. He is counting too. In the days that follow, Alexandria makes a performance of normal life. Barges tie up and unload without fuss. Priests nod to soldiers without flinching. The library breathes slowly as if afraid to disturb pages that prefer to be asleep when history prowls outside. Cleopatra appears on the river with a procession that is both festival and memorandum. The hull beneath her glows like a smoothed jewel. Oars move the way a chorus breathes. Music leans against the air and leaves fingerprints. Rumor substitutes the word love where the text clearly says leverage. She allows it. Stories are also ships. They carry cargo where soldiers cannot. But there are moments when the spectacle drops a curtain and the room returns. Cleopatra in a small chamber, a lamp drawing a circle on the map like a moon. A list of names pronounced quietly, each measured for weight and decay. A calculation of how much grain can be promised without teaching famine to speak loudly next year. A second list, which Roman moods deserve soothing and which deserve distance. She is sovereign of timing. She knows that help is a friend that charges interest. She is prepared to pay it if the rate is favorable to survival. A courier brings the news no one planned for and everyone expected. A knife had a schedule. Rome proves again that stability is a rumor it enjoys spreading about itself. Caesar falls and the palace does not. The math changes but the operation does not. Cleopatra seals the room and opens it again with a different expression worn like new linen. Contingency was not a note at the bottom of the page. It was written in the first line. Grain still moves. Alexandria still hums. The Nile still counts. She adjusts the figures and keeps the rhythm. You step back into the hall where incense still practices its slow climb. The air is warm, and the night outside is thick with lotus and spreading voices. In a world of legions, she bet on language and leverage. The lamp circle still glows on the map when the room lifts its eyes to a larger stage. The city becomes a corridor, the corridor becomes a procession, and policy puts on robes brighter than reason. You step out into a morning tuned for spectacle. Trumpets skirl over marble and turn the air into bright metal. Laurel oil warms under the sun and blooms into a clean, green sweetness that clings to hair and hands. Sweat gathers under armor and at the nape of necks in tidy drops that mean endurance, not strain. The street is already a sentence with too many commas. Today, the punctuation is intentional. You feel stone receive the stomp of sandals and hooves, and then, like a slow tide, the murmur of names: Caesar, Cleopatra, Caesarion. The last rides a breath softer, like a rumor rehearsing its lines before the curtain. A standard flashes, stitched with gold thread that flares and dims as the breeze edits it. The crowd inhales, curiosity, calculation, and a little fear mixed like incense in a brazen bowl. You taste iron from nearby spearheads and a powdery sweetness, almost like pollen, as gold leaf flakes onto fingertips that reached where they were not supposed to. It sticks there, like proof of a story already taking root. Inside a temple cool enough to hush sweat, you trail a hand along carved granite. The stone is colder than politics. The deity under your palm wears a face that saw dynasties pass like parades, and now watches a new pageant try to braid itself into old ritual. Priests move with the measured economy of men who know how to escort gods through time. They welcome Rome with the deliberate courtesy of an elder greeting a talented, unruly child. A garland crosses a threshold. A formula is spoken. The echo sounds like consent because it was built to. Cleopatra understands these rooms as well as she understands ships. She positions herself where every eye must pass, and then makes the act of looking feel like the viewer's idea. Linen whispers at her ankles, jewelry chimes under its breath. She carries divinity with the practicum of the Ptolemies, Isis in gesture, sovereign in gaze, accountant in the crease of her brow when numbers misbehave. At her side, a child who is also a symbol, Caesarion. He is small enough to be lifted, large enough to be read. The cartouche that carries his name is longer than his arm. When he reaches for his mother's hand, 100 interpretations reach with him. You watch two economies meet, one pays in grain, the other in glory. Temples receive offerings that glitter. docks receive schedules that bind. A triumph in Rome smells like laurel oil, hot leather, and crowds wrung out by shouting. A procession in Alexandria smells like lotus, incense, and the faint salt of river wind that wandered into town on the hem of a sail. Cleopatra stitches those atmospheres together. On a barge veined with gold, she offers a horizon to men who like to think in roads. On a dais veined with shadow, she offers ritual to men who like to think in laws. Both accept, because both are tired of being only themselves. You stand at the edge of a square where banners throw little rectangles of shade and the crowd jostles for a view it will later deny wanting. A herald lifts his voice until it cracks like a standard in high wind. Names and titles pile up, building platforms you cannot see but must climb to keep up. Queen of Kings, King of Kings, son of a god, friend and ally of the Roman people. Each honor is also a receipt. Each receipt is also a claim. When Caesarion is lifted to be seen, the city inhales the way it does when the baker opens the oven door. Heat, hope, and a reflex older than policy rise together. You cross to the library's precincts where cool is a principle, not a temperature. Here, iconography is another kind of fleet. Scribes have learned to make gods travel well on papyrus and stone. A fresco offers Isis to Roman eyes without asking them to surrender Juno. A relief makes Horus's falcon look at home beside an eagle that will tolerate no equals. You hear a scholar explain, very softly, that names can be neighbors without becoming twins. You hear a soldier explain, less softly, that neighbors can be problems when they build taller houses. Both are correct. Both keep talking. By midday, tribute gleams on tables like precise suns, gold bowls hammered thin, ivory combs that taught their mirrors patience, bolts of linen so even they could be used as rulers. The hands that lift them belong to men who count, not men who fight. These gifts are statements dressed as objects. This is what Egypt can bring without asking permission. This is how Rome will look holding it. You glance across faces lined with admiration that would rather be suspicion. Pride bristles. It hides under compliments the way a dagger hides under a fold of cloth. At a shrine open to the sky, an altar smokes in a language that needs no translator. Laurel leaves hiss and spit. A priest traces a figure in ash you would recognize even if you had never seen it, an empire's initials turned into a blessing. Then another sign, older, curves over the first and turns it into a sentence, a goddess who has learned new ways to be praised. The crowd sways. Somewhere, a joke tries to be born and is smothered by timing. A Roman officer watches the smoke straighten and thinks in marching columns. You follow the procession into a hall where marble and shadow play chess. Trumpets skid and recover at the far end, their notes skirling against the chill like bright birds who took a wrong turn. The air is thick with names dipped in resin and scent winging. Caesarion stands beneath a carved image of a god who has been both child and king for as long as memory pays rent. Gold leaf flakes under the painter's breath, drifting onto the boy's shoulder like a prophecy that refuses to stay put. He does not flinch. He has learned stillness as a dialect of power. Here, pageantry does what armies cannot. It tells a story the body wants to believe. If a queen stands like a goddess and a child carries a god's title, then the future is a foregone conclusion. Economics becomes liturgy, grain as sacrament, convoys as feast days, stipends as blessings. A city that eats because Egypt wills, it is a city that will listen when Egypt speaks. You feel the seduction. You also feel the resistance. Rome prefers the sound of its own narrative. It hears flutes and answers with drums. On a terrace above the noise, men in clean togas talk with their hands. The words are crisp and shaped for distance. No one says fear. They say precedent and jurisdiction. No one says jealousy. They say dignity of the Senate and people. From here, the gold looks excessive even to light. The line between admiration and warning is thin as a sheet of hammered metal. It shivers in the breeze and cuts both ways. You brush past a statue in a cool colonnade and feel granite take your warmth and keep it. A carved mouth smiles the way stone smiles, indifferently. The inscription below speaks two languages like a child who never learned they were separate. You admire the elegance and think of an account ledger. Fusion is beautiful when you hold it to the light. It is expensive when you balance it at dusk. Coin clinks in a bowl nearby. The sound rings high and sweet, then dies fast against marble that does not care how devout the donor felt. Twilight folds the city into softer edges. Torches wake and multiply. Laurel oil is tired but still polite. In the afterglow, rumor sorts the day. What was promised, what was implied, what was displayed too loudly for comfort. One corner of the city glows with contented certainty. We have seen the future and it is draped correctly. Another tightens its jaw. We have seen the bill and it wears perfume. You pass between them, the bridge no one notices until it is gone. Before the last trumpet falls asleep, you look back at a balcony where silhouettes linger. A small form stands between two larger legends, a child made into an answer. The crowd will remember the shine and forget the arithmetic. The Senate will remember the arithmetic and pretend not to see the shine. If you call a queen a goddess, the Senate hears tax increase. The shine has barely settled on the gold leaf when the room remembers morning is a costume and night is the business underneath. Processions fade into corridors. Corridors narrow into chambers where maps lean on knives and wine sits like a slow decision in a cup. You step through air that still smells of laurel and incense and find a different scent waiting. Grapes pressed into velvet, smoke traced thin over lamp wicks, a whisper of desert dust that got in despite the curtains. The stage is smaller now. The stakes are not. He enters like a trumpet remembered after silence. Mark Antony, sun-warmed bronze made into a person, appetite turned into policy only when someone is watching closely. Cleopatra stands as if the floor were water and she had chosen the current. Their conversation starts where spectacle ended, with a ledger disguised as a toast. The banquet is wine-dark and long. Plates gleam, jokes spark like flint, and somewhere singer tells a story about gods who fell in love and forgot to count. You feel the heat in your face and then the chill as the night grows large around the lights. Laughter lingers into ash on the plates. Promises do the same on the tongue. Gifts arrive that are also lines drawn on the earth. A territory becomes a favor. Cyprus, Cilicia, swathes of coast sketched toward an old dream of the Ptolemies getting their borders back. Titles multiply. Queen of Kings, King of Kings, children named for the sky because the ground is a battleground. The air thickens with perfume and precedent. A servant cracks a pomegranate and the seeds spill like rubies onto a map. No one pretends not to notice. Antony signs where Cleopatra points, and the wax seals set like small suns cooling on papyrus. They look harmless, the way a horizon looks harmless until someone tries to cross it. Night gives way to a desert dawn so thin it could cut skin. Wind needles the tent cloth and stitches the cold into the seams. You hold down a corner while a courier fights the flap. His hands shake from more than weather. The seal splits with a neat sigh and the message exhales trouble. In Rome, patience is practicing with a blade. Optics, someone says, because the reality is not fit for breakfast. The donations at Alexandria have turned ceremony into suspicion. A queen crowned in titles Romans do not hand out. A Roman general acting like a pharaoh. The city by the Tiber hates when other cities play Rome to their own audience. Honor leans against survival and pretends they are cousins. Antony's officers call him back toward the kind of glory that requires bleeding inland. His heart is learning riverlight and the softness that arrives when a house smells like lotus and warm linen. Loyalty to legions rumbles in his chest. Loyalty to the woman who showed him a world built on more than marching lifts his chin. The tent rope hums. Sand ticks. He is a hinge and knows it. Hinges do not choose which door they carry. They only creak. Rumor eats in Rome. It never pays, but it never leaves hungry. The Senate hears about pearls melted in wine, about games and gardens and jokes told in a language that is not theirs. They pretend to care about frugality and actually care about control. Eastern splendor is a mirror they refuse to look into. It shows a version of empire with different gods at the top and a different queen holding the balance. Pride bristles and hides behind law. Edicts sharpen. Speeches grow clean and cruel. Couriers bring those words across water and lay them on Alexandrian tables like knives wrapped in compliments. On the harbor, oars begin to thud with a purpose that knows winter is not the only enemy. Actium haunts the horizon before a single sail is cut. You can hear it in the way carpenters argue more quietly, in the way pitch pots are kept a little closer to the fire, in the way sailors run hands along ropes as if checking more than fiber. The sea pretends to be neutral. It is not. It keeps score in wreckage. You watch a pilot trace wind with his jaw and decide nothing, because decisions are above his pay and below his fear. Banquets go on, because policy likes witnesses. Wine darkens lips and makes bravery conversational. Cleopatra toasts futures with steady eyes. Antony answers with a grin that hides a tally. Ash settles on plates and is brushed away, only to fall again. Gifts of territory are repeated aloud until they sound permanent. The map on the wall is kinder than the one in Rome. You notice men who eat but do not taste and women who listen without blinking. Every laugh arrives late. Every clink of cup on table is a beat skipped by someone's heart. Between feasts, the desert wind does its work. It strips tents to the thought of shelter and asks bones whether they are truly committed to their arrangement. Dawn spears everything it touches and leaves no angle uninspected. Antony drills, writes, drills. A letter from Octavia arrives like a reminder that Rome has a face that forgives and keeps records. Optics lean hard, husbands, wives, propriety, promises made before the gods who prefer Italian wine. A second letter, hotter, speaks with Octavian's teeth. It is not about love. It is about the stage. Antony is standing on the wrong one. Wax cracks again and again. Some seals split neat, some crumble as if the message inside resisted being born. News runs on bare feet, an accusation here, a revelation there, a will that says unwise things about burial and bequests. Alexandria responds with a festival that is also a counterargument. The city wears its best blue. River light behaves as if it were hired. If you can make a story bright enough, sometimes eyes forget their suspicion for a length of time that matters. The problem is that suspicion is tireless and does not sleep even when the music asks nicely. The oars speak the last language of the chapter. They thud toward Actium with the heaviness of men who have realized they are carrying not only themselves but the weight of two stories that cannot share a stage. The sea is indifferent and exact. It punishes mistakes and rewards timing as if it had invented both. You stand on a deck that smells like pitch, salt, and prayers edited down to their verbs. The horizon is a line that refuses to move, and the ships line up to argue with it. On shore, Rome's appetite for control has found its edge. It sharpens law into weapon, rumor into proof, mercy into schedule. In camps, honor and survival continue their quiet argument, conducted in the tilt of a shield and the length of a glance when orders are read. Above them, loyalty and optics box in daylight and grin for the crowd. The desert wind cannot reach the Senate, but the Senate has learned to make its own weather. You think of the granaries breathing in shade, of the schedules inked when the lamps guttered, of the anchors rising with iron courage, of the treaties rolled smooth as hope. Grain kept its promises as long as ships could move and clerks could count. But politics is heavier than sacks and less buoyant than wood. At Actium, history holds its breath and then lets it out in a different key. The oars keep time as long as they can. The sea keeps score exactly as long as it must. The grain kept sailing until the politics sank the fleet. Paper burns faster than rumor, but both leave the same smell in a palace at dawn, ash that remembers pages, and a sweetness that pretends last night was only a story. The banquets are quiet now. The maps are not. You walk through rooms that still carry a shadow of music and find the furniture rearranged into a new sentence. After Actium, the words are shorter, the verbs are final. The sea has said no. The city must now learn to speak yes to a different master. It begins in footsteps more than fanfare. Soldiers' sandals scuff temple courtyards that used to echo for kings. The sound is practical, unamused, and patient. A standard blinks an eagle where a double crown once stood. The Nile takes the reflection without comment. It has outlived more headwear than any human can count. Inside the administration halls, the air is a mixture of lamp smoke and fresh wax. You hear Latin orders echoing down Greek corridors, clipped consonants meeting marble built for vowels to float. The languages do not fight, they overlap like tides. A clerk turns a seal ring and stamps wax by lamplight. The impression catches a tiny glare and goes dull as it cools. Paperwork is conquest that does not raise its voice. A governor's title trades places with the prefects. Autonomy becomes appointment. Names arrive from elsewhere with periods attached. You watch a list become a law simply by receiving a signature. For most of a country, that is how empire feels: less trumpet, more schedule. Outside, a priest adjusts a headdress with hands that have done this movement since childhood, then adds another gesture learned last month, a libation for an emperor who is also a god by decree. Balance is the new ritual. Piety must stand beside the imperial cult without blinking. The old deities remain where they have always been, but their procession now pauses at a shrine that did not exist last season. Incense splits its smoke in two directions and hopes to be considered generous rather than divided. Alexandria learns to pronounce new titles without grinding its teeth. Statues of Augustus acquire offerings that smell like compromise, honey, oil, and quiet. Senators are notably absent. The prefect rules in the emperor's name and will not tolerate visitors with ambitions larger than permits. The rule is clear and feels like a hand on the city's shoulder. Rome has made Egypt personal property in everything but poetry. You feel it in the way courtyards are measured with eyes before meetings begin. You feel it in the way doors learn to open inward for Latin without forgetting how to open outward for Greek. Local elites find their reflections altered. Some adapt quickly, learning to translate influence into office, liturgies, obligations attached to land that now count as both privilege and conscription. A merchant becomes an official and discovers that stamps weigh more than coins. A scholar writes a dedication that thanks two pantheons with one breath and hears it echo back as survival. Others vanish without a sound you can point to. They do not fall. They fade. That is how policy is kind when it does not need to be cruel. In the gnome capitals, notices are posted in neat hands. They carry a new clock inside them. Tax is now a rhythm everyone must learn, not just how much, but when, and in whose name the amount gains its meaning. A scribe reads the text aloud for those who cannot read the letters and finds that nearly everyone understands anyway. Information travels in grain lines faster than in scripts. A woman buying flour can recite the deadlines before a clerk can sharpen his reed. The temples breathe through it. Columns still throw shade that feels like protection. Reliefs still tell stories with a certainty no philosopher can topple. Yet the courtyards wear new scuffs where boots have walked, and an altar sometimes waits a heartbeat longer for a procession that paused to salute an image of an emperor. You place your hand on carved granite, and the stone takes your warmth, keeping it the way a careful bookkeeper keeps small coins, without comment, without hurry, without forgetting. At the river, barges load as they always have, but the chatter on the quay has changed verbs. What was send is now dispatch, what was sell is now remit. The annona binds Rome to Egypt with rope thicker than metaphor. Schedules are more than suggestions, they are nerves. The men who count sacks have new tokens for the same old hunger. You hear the stylus scrape and realize that the line between famine and gratitude is several signatures wide. In an office that used to belong to a satrap and before that to a different kind of official, a map lies open under a small sun of oil light. The prefect points to lines that will become roads because he says they will. Auxiliaries garrison where myths once kept order. 3 legions was the opening number. 2 will do once the country learns this new arithmetic. Their tents add geometry to the edges of towns. Children learn to identify units by shield design the way their grandparents identified gnomes by standard animals. The library remains itself because usefulness is a kind of armor. A Roman visitor orders a copy of a medical text and treats the scribe with a respect that sounds like impatience softened by need. Papyrus rolls in and out with the comfort of a lung in good air. Even the empire pauses for medicine and math. When a philosopher explains geometry with a sanded table and a patient finger, 2 soldiers find themselves nodding as if to a drill command. Right angles soothe everyone. Coinage shifts but does not stop. Tetradrachms keep their face but endure a new rate, value married to a denarius by policy that turns exchange into obedience. Hands that loved older silver learn to love compliance. Markets adjust the way rivers adjust banks after a flood. Everyone complains, then everyone finds the new shallow, and boats pass again. The smell of garum still tangs the alleys, the oil still shimmers in bowls, the bargaining still starts 3 steps before the store and ends 2 steps after. In village shrines, priests count festivals and find room for one more procession that praises the emperor because the calendar says it is wise. Hymns are edited. The chorus still knows the old verses by heart and sings them half a tone softer beneath the new refrain. A boy carrying a lamp looks up at an imperial wreath and wonders how far away the face behind it lives. His grandfather answers with a shrug that was taught by centuries, far enough to ignore you, close enough to matter. Somewhere, a letter goes too far. A prefect boasts in stone about victories he did not need to publicize, and the echo off marble brings down his career. Egypt is not a stage for senators. It is a storehouse with a throne room attached, and the throne is 3 seas away. Ambition learns this here in Latin the way it used to learn in Greek. Rome dislikes surprises in its pantry. The daily sounds settle into a new chord. Latin orders echo, but the answer back is still Greek, and the work itself is Egyptian, measured, seasonal, patient. Officials stamp wax by lamplight and press authority into warm circles that cool into obedience. Soldiers' sandals scuff temple courtyards and teach reverence to walk with discipline. The Nile reflects an eagle instead of a double crown and lets both sink in the evening when light goes flat. Some nights the river tells an old story in its low voice anyway. It reminds anyone listening that it has seen crowns come and go, scripts change direction, and gods change names. The water rises when it will, recedes when it must, and leaves behind the same black silt that feeds everyone regardless of emblem. In that silt, reeds still scratch at the ankles of children. In that silt, a farmer decides to trust the flood more than the coin. You leave a courtyard where a statue of Augustus has learned the angle of local sun and cross into a lane where baker's oven forgets empires daily and remembers only heat and timing. The city operates in layers, imperial over municipal, cult over cult, Latin over Greek over Coptic, law over habit. Underneath all of it, the same human arithmetic, hunger, hope, fear of change, relief at routine. The annexation feels like an earthquake remembered after the dust has settled, cracks mapped, furniture moved, people sleeping again because morning still comes. And yet, the edges hold tension. A local notable postpones a donation because the new taxes arrived early. A priest delays a ritual by one chant length to make sure a centurion has passed. An official walks a little faster in a neighborhood that remembers him from before he had a title. Adaptation is a skill here, not a virtue. For those who cannot learn it, there is a silence where they once stood. By the time the lamps are lit, the paperwork has traveled farther than any herald. Notices are copied, seals cooled, couriers released into streets where conversations flow around their legs like cats. A boy will sleep with a token under his pillow that entitles his mother to grain tomorrow. A man will fold a decree under a ledger so the day's totals can weigh on both at once. A woman will whisper a prayer that names an emperor because naming is cheap and security is not. You pause at the river and watch the first stars attempt themselves in the water before they are brave enough to attempt the sky. The eagle floats and breaks, floats and breaks, with each small wrinkle the current sends. The double crown used to do the same dance. Symbols learn to swim or they sink. People do not have that luxury, they float each other. If you write it in a book, it sounds clean. Egypt annexed, administration reformed, armies reduced, grain secured. If you stand here, it sounds like this: sandals on stone, language changing gears without stalling, stamps clicking, lamps breathing, a river ignoring you with the benevolence only a river can afford. The friendship clause was replaced by a job description. The ink is dry on new titles, but the city still wakes the same way, to the sound of work that keeps thoughts from wandering too far uphill. First it is rope, taut past patience, shrieking against bollard stone while a dockhand leans his whole life into the angle. Then wood, ramps thumping, gangplanks answering with a hollow, drum-sure note. Amphorae sweat resin in the cool before dawn, leaving tacky fingerprints on palms, a pine bitter sweetness that rides the air even after the jars are stacked out of sight. Gulls scissor the sky into sharp white pieces and stitch it back with their calls. The harbor breathes in, and Rome prepares to eat. You follow the rhythm that begins far away. In Alexandria, a clerk counted sacks by lamplight, stamped wax into obedience, and released a convoy when the wind remembered to be useful. The ships came north along coasts that pretended to be friendly, slipped past rocks with practiced modesty, and reached deep water where storms keep their own calendars. Sailors listened to canvas talk, watched lines twitch, and learned to read a sky that never stops revising its text. They aimed not at Rome but at its pulse, first Egypt's great harbor, then the blue between Crete and Malta, then Sicily's narrow teeth, then Puteoli or Portus when the Tiber looked unfriendly and Ostia bristled. From there, smaller hulls carried the load upriver, tethered to mules or to men on towpaths who measured distance with the quiet burn in their shoulders. At the mouth of the Tiber the morning is already busy. Dock ropes shriek again, proud of their own stubbornness. A foreman squints at a slate, licks a thumb, and smears chalk into decision. This barge, that hoist, those sacks to the state Horia, these to the merchant who bribed the right god last week. The amphorae keep sweating, resin glinting in thin skins on clay, while tally marks march down columns until they turn into rations. The city has learned to hear numbers as reassurance. Stylus scratches are lullabies when the weather is good. Upstream, the air changes from brine and pitch to flour and heat. The warm, yeasty breath of bakeries rolls out of arches like a promise. You feel it graze your face and settle at the back of your tongue, the way hope does when it expects to be kept. Inside, men turn loaves with bare forearms hewn by repetition, the crusts taking color like mornings do, slow, then suddenly. Outside, the clatter of dole lines begins. Tokens jingle in hands that remember the day they were earned and the day they were almost taken away. Wooden bins thud when grain hits them. Instructions ride the air in a dozen accents. Children hop from foot to foot until the smell defeats their discipline. Logistics is an empire you rarely see but always obey. A schedule leaving Alexandria is a law in Rome 1 month later. A storm in the Gulf of Sidra is an argument on the Aventine. A governor's neat theft becomes a rumor with sharp elbows at the docks and a bruise on a baker's margin by noon. You walk along the queue and feel the mood tilt when a cart arrives light, then tilt back when a second cart arrives heavy enough to make the axle complain. The city forgives in increments and condemns all at once. Everyone knows this. Everyone tries not to say it out loud. Routes draw themselves if you watch long enough. From Nile distributaries to Lake Merotis to the canal and into the great harbor, the first choreography. Across the inner sea to Portus, the second, a dance with wind that refuses to learn steps. From Portus to Ostia to Rome on barges nosed by poles and pulled by animals that know the river's sulks, the third, a slow, muscular patience. Each handoff is a prayer wrapped in procedure. Each arrival is relief wrapped in steam from fresh bread. The gulls cut patterns above you while a supervisor counts quietly, not sacks now, but heartbeats until the line starts moving again. You hear the clack of scales correcting themselves, the mutter when a weight looks too generous to be true, the cough of a guard who would rather be anywhere else and is honest about it. A woman ahead of you shifts a sleeping child from one shoulder to the other with the grace of someone who learned long ago to make adjustments without losing momentum. She has a token. She has a plan for the token that involves 3 meals and 1 small gift if the price on olives behaves. The city runs on such arithmetic as much as it runs on imperial edicts. Storms are not the only thieves. Pirates watch the same skies and keep their own lists. Somewhere past Crete, a captain stares at a horizon that suddenly grew teeth and decides whether to trust speed or surrender cargo to keep his crew breathing. Somewhere near Sicily, a cutter slides out from a cove with oars tucked into silence and hope sharpened into very practical shapes. Far from the noise, a governor with clean hands writes 2 numbers on a wax tablet and changes them by 1 digit. Then orders a scribe to file the document under title that sounds dry even to dust. That single mark becomes 20 angry throats this afternoon and 100 tomorrow. You cut across a square where bakeries exhale, where vendors drag shutters aside, and where an old man lifts a cup the exact moment a friend puts a warm heel of bread in his palm. Their timing is a combined age of 120 years and 4 decades of practice. A boy tries to barter a story for a second ladle of porridge and almost succeeds because he tells it with his hands. A magistrate passes, face neutral, cloak exact, the air around him adjusting as if it remembered suddenly how to behave. He glances at the line and keeps walking. He can hear whether the city is calm without looking, and right now it is. At the warehouses, amphory shoulder in like well-behaved cattle. A steward ticks, counts, gestures, and stops to scratch at a resin streak that caught a bit of straw in transit. This detail will itch at him all day because order is a faith he practices personally. Over his head, pigeons argue about ownership of a roof beam. Under his feet, a weevil makes its own plans. The steward thinks of drying, sealing, stacking, and rotation. He thinks of everything except the moment when a missed convoy changes his voice in front of his staff. He has done that twice. He does not want to do it again. By mid-morning the gulls are savage and certain. They laugh at dropped crumbs and judge inefficient technique without mercy. A dog sleeps with both eyes half open near a sack that smells like barley and attention. A sailor, newly paid, holds his coin as if it were an apology and a promise in the same small circle. He will spend some on wine, some on a letter home, and some on a pair of sandals that squeak exactly once before learning his gait. He earned each of those things by doing hours' worth of work the wind took credit for. You pause at a vantage where the river makes a clean statement of itself. Barges nose up against the current as if the water were only a rumor with bad manners. Men on the towpath lean into their straps at angles that would make lesser vertebrae protest. They do not protest. They mutter, spit, laugh once, and pull. This is how 1,000,000 mouths are kept from remembering how loud they can be when empty, rope by rope, step by step, sack by sack. The glory is invisible because it is ordinary. The ordinary is glorious because it is reliable. Then a cloud pulls a private trick, shadowing one port and not its neighbor. Then a captain misreads a sky he has known since boyhood. Then a governor's nephew invents a need that justifies a diversion. Then the line on the key grows longer without growing calmer. Tension arrives softly at first, like a badly tuned string. It tightens until speech goes flat and eyes get busy counting alternatives. A woman at the front of the queue squares her shoulders and makes room for one more child without asking whose he is. A guard clears his throat. Somewhere a gong meant for ceremony becomes a signal for patience that no one wants to heed. By noon, the city has either forgiven the morning or decided to remember it. You can tell by the noise in the alleys. If it is laughter and potholes, Rome will nap after lunch. If it is knives and arguments, Rome will stage small riots in the late afternoon and pretend to be surprised. All the while, the machinery grinds on, Alexandria's schedules, Portus's cranes, Ostia's ropes, the Tiber's towpaths, the Horia's shadows, the bakery's breaths. Logistics is the empire that never sleeps and rarely sings, but when it fails, the chorus is immediate and untrained. You walk back through heat that smells like bread and tar and the inside of a clay jar that kept its promise. A girl balances a tray of rolls with the focus of a general mapping a flank. A clerk rolls up a list with hands that shake a little and tells himself it is the resin. A gull lands, considers greatness, and settles for theft. A priest crosses the square with a small basket and a large obligation. The city watches him without looking. Evening will soften surfaces and make everyone kinder than they mean to be. The ovens will exhale one last time, the Horia will shut their eyes, and the river will flatten into a mirror that lies about distance. In houses high and low, bread will break into steam and quiet. Peace will taste like crust and oil and enough. Tomorrow, the same miracle will be required again with the same unspectacular heroics. Peace was baked daily, and burned quickly when ships were late. The city falls quiet after bread is won, but the day keeps speaking in other languages, smoke, stone, and stories carried by people who think they are only walking home. You follow the warmth that still hangs over the bakeries and find yourself in a neighborhood where an altar to Isis smokes between a wine shop and a cobbler. The incense moves like a slow river, sailors touch the air and touch their lips, women knot vows into the smoke with fingers that learned prayer on different shores, and a small bronze sistrum shakes once, like a secret checking if it is safe to be told. A Roman child asks the name of the goddess and gets two answers that agree just enough to share a street. Turn a corner and an Egyptian obelisk needles the Italian sky with patient certainty. It does not rush the clouds. It does not explain itself. Latin letters on the pedestal try to be hosts, while older hieroglyphs climb the shaft and refuse translation on command. A passerby squints and reads what can be read, dates, dedications, the emperor's smile folded into stone. The rest remains a river of birds and reeds and thrones that says, "I was old before your city practiced its first oath." The piazza treats it like a compass. Feet circle, lovers sit, pigeons audition for ownership, and the sky tolerates being measured. In a courtyard off a busy lane, inscriptions switch tongues mid-sentence as easily as a merchant counts in one currency and charges in another. Greek makes a promise, Latin notarizes it, and Egyptian finishes with a blessing that carries the weight of weather. The stone remembers all of it without favor. A finger traces the grooves and comes away gritty and convinced. Nearby, a mosaic flashes Nile beasts underfoot, crocodiles frozen mid-roll, ibis craning as if they heard a familiar syllable, lotus blooming forever in tesserae that never wilt. The floor tells a river story to a house that will never hear frogs in sudden chorus or the slap of oars at dusk, and still the house believes. You stand where the city remixes its own faith. Serapis shares a wall with Apollo without complaint, and a shrine to Isis holds votives shaped like ships from hands that fear the winter sea. Adoption and appropriation argue in the corners. One says welcome, the other says take off your shoes. A senator murmurs about foreign ways with a mouth that gladly sips Eastern wine. A matron leaves oil where she used to leave grain and finds the new ritual fits her grief almost as well as the old one did. Priests learn each other's calendar math and pretend not to notice when feast days overlap. The city's heart beats in borrowed rhythms it now claims as its own. Architecture keeps the receipts. Porticos sprout papyrus capitals as if a craftsman's hand remembered a different marsh. Villas steal Egyptian blue for ceilings that pretend to be sky even in bad weather. Courtyards lift their pools to catch light the way the Nile's back catches morning. Meanwhile, along the triumphant roads, obelisks whisper an older geometry into a younger empire's sentences. Rome takes statues and ideas and thinks that is the same as taking their meanings. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the meaning waits and walks out later wearing a different name. Policy writes itself into habit. Grain doles become expectations, expectations become law, and law becomes a kind of prayer said daily at the warehouse door. In return, Egypt learns to read its taxes as a horoscope, which prefect is skimming, which convoy will be late, which winter will require math and luck. Calendars drift both directions. Egyptian feasts find Roman evenings. Roman market days teach Alexandria when to hurry. When the bellies of Rome are calm, the Senate speaks nobly. When the sea misbehaves, religion works overtime. Memory and myth begin their long negotiation. A child in Rome grows up knowing that Isis is good for sailors and mothers. He does not know why, and he does not need to. A child in Egypt grows up counting in Latin under his breath when he must be precise. He switches back to his grandmother's words when he needs to be brave. Histories choose which rumors graduate into stories. Monuments lend authority to the version told by the last person to dust them. The libraries keep both. The letter from a prefect boasting too loudly, the hymn where two gods answer to one name and neither seems insulted. There are things empire can take and things it cannot digest. It can carry an obelisk across water and set it upright with ropes and pride. It cannot teach the stone to forget the sun it used to read. It can decree a god's new title. It cannot relocate the ache that sends a sailor to the same altar before every voyage. It can pave a forum with mosaics of Nile creatures. It cannot convince the floor to stop dreaming of mud and reeds when rain finds it at night. The city wears what it has borrowed with authority, but some mornings the fit is clearly tailored around something older underneath. By evening the altars have cooled to a breath that lingers. The obelisks have turned into needles sewing dusk to rooftops. The inscriptions hold their tongues until tomorrow. The mosaics are dim rivers under lamplight. The bakeries have long since emptied their warmth into hands and mouths. The docks have rolled up their ropes like tired serpents. The warehouses have counted themselves to sleep. Somewhere, a priest in Rome puts out the last flame before locking the door on Isis' precinct. Somewhere else, a woman in Alexandria closes a ledger and touches the page like a forehead. You walk to water because water remembers. The Tiber moves with its habitual bad mood and dependable strength. The Nile moves inside your head with its patience and schedule. Between them, the sea keeps everybody honest. What began as an uneasy friendship became a system, then a story, then a landscape. Gods traded attributes, columns traded capitals, calendars traded confidence. The Mediterranean did not pick a side. It taught sides to drift. If the night has been gentle, let it end that way. Dim the lamps. Leave the altar smoke to the street. Let the obelisks count the stars in a language no city owns. Breathe once for bread that arrived on time, once for ships that found the channel, once for people who learned to share a god without losing their own. History will keep remaking the world by trade and title and rumor. Rivers will keep remaking it by simply arriving. You can annex a river's banks, its current has other ideas.